Hi everyone, I'm Roshana. So I am the content creator at Monzo. If you don't know Monzo, it's a UK-based bank. Their cards look like this, so even if you haven't heard the name, you might have seen the card being tapped around London, especially. I basically look after all of the content creation, meaning I try my best to think of ideas of what we can talk about on social. I help with strategy, and I'm also in charge of creating some of the actual like videos and stuff for TikTok. So I don't do any of the design work. We've just hired a new designer, which is great for me because my Microsoft Paint skills won't fall on anyone. Yeah, and I'm still new to Monzo. I just joined about 6 months ago, so pretty new to the fintech scene.
Excellent stuff. Excellent. We were talking before this session about the fact that just prior to us getting this panel together, I just set up an account in Monzo, and I'm loving it. And I just had a Saturday afternoon at a girl guiding camp with the kids. So
Meant
it's
to be.
quite. The stars lined up here. The stars lined up here. So okay, excellent. So I think to look forwards to trends, it's always useful to kind of look back and see what worked in the past. So Lisa, do you want to kick stuff off? And what really worked for you guys on social or content or just like general themes last year? And what do you see kind of carrying over into 2022?
Yeah, really, really good question. So I think the top things that have really stuck out for us as girl guiding, talking on social media. So we talk to, just to give you all a bit of an idea, when we say the people, different people we talk to, we'll be talking to parents, girls that could be online, so any, from age 10 upwards, and then also volunteers and our leaders and various people that have joined girl guiding. And the thing that has really stuck out for us is live videos of people talking and videos of people having real conversations, real experiences, whether that is volunteering or, sports people taking part in the Olympics and Winter Olympics. So we're talking about live what's happening in the world and actually just having real authentic moments on social media. And the platforms that have worked the best for those are Instagram, and I think that will continue to do so. We're not actively on TikTok at the moment at the headquarters, but Instagram has been great for us, and we're focusing that as a channel more this year. And Facebook, I think it's interesting in terms of our audiences and who's on those, and we're still figuring out that more and more, but we've definitely noticed that the parents are on there and our members. So it's about showing really visually like exciting human connection experiences that are real. And I think the more, going into this year, the more and more we can show those, like we are today, having real conversations live, will be good, because I think people have a lot of fatigue from last year.
Yep, absolutely. And how about you, Roshana, with Monzo?
Yeah, so for us, like last year, I think to give it like an overall picture of just like the social environment itself was that there was always something new, and that's the nature of social. So like keeping up with all of those doesn't always have to be your priority. I think pick a few lanes and stick in them, because social media can be so it can be really overwhelming, especially if you're a small team. You're probably double hatting or like triple hatting, depending on how small your team is with a small budget. So I think one thing that we sort of like wanted to stick to was like pick a few lanes and stick to them, and not try and do everything at once. I think like an umbrella view of like what sort of worked was having a steady drumbeat of content, which we are known for. So we have a few pillars, like social content pillars at Monzo. You might have heard of this saying, live, laugh, love. So we basically use that to inspire our social content, except we've added one more: live, laugh, love, and learn. So like we encourage people to live their best financial lives, laugh along with us at like funny, relatable money moments. Love talking about money, and learning about money, and learning about you know, just like financial buzzwords that you probably like, some people, especially like me, who should have known in school, but you're too afraid to ask at this point. So like having a steady drumbeat of content that's going out that like hits those points, and then also being reactive. So I'd say like an 80-20 split. You can't predict when to be reactive, like that's not something you can predict for. So like actually just even if it's 15 minutes, you know, every morning after lunch or in the afternoon, just keeping an eye out for things that you can jump on. The things that we reacted to quickly last year was some of our best performing stuff, and they took the quickest amount of time, because sometimes like when you're under a bit of pressure, like that's when you work hardest. Our social media manager did a piece of reactive content around when the entire internet broke down, when WhatsApp, Facebook, all of that had an outage. And that did amazing. And then the next day, we also followed that up with data related content. So this is another way that we picked our lane, and that's Monzo. This is something that really surprised me when I joined, because I'm not a data-driven person at all. But at Monzo, they use data so cleverly. Obviously, they have a lot of spending data from our customers, and we can use that sometimes to look at like back-end information, but we can also use it to help us plan content. So for example, when the internet had that breakdown, we saw a huge spike in people sending 1p transactions to each other, and that's because in the app, when you send 1p to somebody, you can also send a message. So people had basically found a way around the WhatsApp shortage, and we saw a huge spike in that, and we were like, we can use this data. So we used that, and we did like a silly little chart to show like how 1p transactions had gone up, and posted that on a few of our channels, and that also did great. So like it's using like intel that's really specific to your brand to your advantage.
And I saw you reacted to the Tinder swindler, and you did an education thread around protecting yourself against scams online. That is just I thought that was really cool.
We saw so much. If you follow all the meme accounts, like there were so many memes going around about it. I'm pretty sure people were probably sending like Monzo notifications to each other, like my enemy is like requesting for money. If you've seen Tinder swindler, that's a gag somebody uses. So instead of doing that, I think we also have like, as a brand, like we love, like humor is a really big part of our tone of voice, but I think having a responsibility as a bank is also really important. When monitored by the FCA, people trust us with their money. We're serious about money, but we don't always have to be serious about ourselves. But in this instance, like Tinder swindler was like a really key way of highlighting that people are interested about this topic. It is a real thing, like romance scams are real, and our customers can be at risk of that. So we did a reactive content about alerting people about the fraud around that, and that it is real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think clearly falls into that learning pillar. It's just the education side, and it's done in such a human way. I think it's brilliant. Just to remind everyone, please do drop, we've got some really nice comments coming through. Please do drop questions in the QA as well. Like we'd love to hear from you if you've got any questions about what we discussed so far or future things too. So Lisa, like what are your key pillars for the year? Like, do you have defined themes for what you're putting out on social, or defined themes for what you think is going to work this year? Like, what's your approach to that?
It's a really good question, and I guess we've got our own internal pillars. The main thing for us, and we do have pillars, but the main thing for us generally at Girl Guiding is to make sure everything that we do and everything that we say helps to offer and give girls a fun experience. And we are there to help them, and as part of that we're there to spot our volunteers and to make that happen. But it's so important that everything that we do ladders up to that moment of making sure girls are having fun, safe experiences, and they're learning things and they're challenging themselves. So it was really interesting what Rush was saying about tone of voice, because it's so true when you start in marketing. If it's okay to talk about this quickly, it's a big old industry out there, and there's many different sectors, and when you start your career, you're working with very senior people sometimes, or you're in meetings with them. And I just wanted to say to anyone that's listening, like, if you do hear acronyms that don't make sense, someone else in the room probably doesn't know either. So
Yeah.
don't worry about asking. We were talking about tone of voice at Girl Guiding the other week, and for us as an organisation, it's so important to speak in everyday language, because we are people communicating to people. And I think sometimes with marketing, it's easy to get caught up in making things very kind of like impressive and complicated. And actually, it's so important to remember why you're doing something, and also to make sure that when you talk to those people, it makes sense and it's really clear. So it's something that, you know, I'm still growing and learning at on a professional level, but using everyday language to make sure we are communicating to people and also we're relevant for girls is so important.
It's actually really difficult to do, I think, to almost drop the that sense of needing to be super professional or use industry terms or use internal language and just talk in a human way. It's harder than it sounds, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you can feel yourself sometimes. I don't know if anyone else has an example of this, please feel free to mention in the chat, but sometimes you can find yourself trying to say something in a certain way, but actually it's 10 times easier just saying what you want to say as you would to a friend, and just using that everyday language. Because I think sometimes, you know, in marketing, even internally, you can overthink things sometimes. And actually it's best just to be who you are and talk as you are.
Yep, definitely. And actually, on that note, I had a question around like how obviously you can see in terms of engagement and response from things, like how you're doing in terms of, are you getting the message right? But do you ever go out and get feedback from your audience or feedback from your customers? Or like, how do you, is there a process for feedback, I guess, to make sure that you have got that tone of voice right?
Is that for me or
It's for both of you.
Rosh, you go first. I've been blabbering on, I'll go afterwards.
Yeah, John, do you mind just repeating the question so I've heard it right?
Yeah, no worries. So I guess it's about making sure that you're constantly kind of, you've got your messaging right, you've got your tone right, and you are genuinely kind of on the right level in terms of your audience and what you're saying. Like, have you got a process for getting feedback, or like how do you make sure that you've got it right?
Yeah, so at Monzo, we're really lucky. Like we're not a startup anymore, and you know, we've got a really big team of really clever and inspiring writers. So they write a lot of content for us that's within the app. So if you go on the Monzo app, if you go on the website, a lot of the way that language is broken down, which what we call legacy banks, which are, you know, the original banks, which you know, you'd see on the high street.
Yeah,
very different to the way that they would talk in app, and our writers are responsible for making sure that, you know, the language isn't intimidating at all, because money can be a really intimidating topic. I'm still scared shitless by it most of the time. So it's important to carry that through into our social media as well. So we would when we plan our content, we have a small but growing team in the content team. So we'd come up with the ideas together, we'd brainstorm, and we'd write it in a way that's really clear. That's if you wouldn't say it out loud, don't write it down. So like, it's kind of like I actually learned this when I was at Innocent. I used to work at Innocent previously, and one of the first things they taught us about our tone of voice was if you wouldn't say it at the end of a phone call, things like yours sincerely or faithfully, or, you know, all of those things, why would you say it in an email? Why would you say it out loud? So that was like a really big thing that stuck with me, because when I joined Innocent, I was literally talking like that in all of my emails. That's not to say that's a bad thing, not at all. It's just, if that's the way you're going to communicate on social media, that's absolutely not how your audience is going to like want to read it, and they'll probably switch off immediately. So yeah, to come back to your question, our process is pretty simple, really. We have like a bit of training with the writers. We sort of already understand the tone of voice, because the brand has an established one. So if you are, you know, very early doors and you still haven't established like your brand personality, that's probably like a really clear direction that you need before talking on social. And then we just, if we're ever like a bit unclear about things like you know, can we specifically talk about this topic? Is it important to us? Is it relevant?
Yep.
Is it safe? Then we would triple check it with like our head of content, or it would go to like a legal team. But that's also because we have to do that as a bank. The rules are different
Yeah.
from what business you're in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think my perception of Monzo was that it was very friendly and unintimidating going in, so you clearly like striking the balance like really, really well. Lisa, what about you guys? Because I guess it's in a way they're both organizations with a fair degree of responsibility, but for different reasons.
Yes, definitely. And in terms of processes, so there are a few ways we do it. I think the main thing to note is really it depends which channel that you're talking on. Our processes vary slightly differently for how we'd go about sense checking that or what we're doing with it. But for example, for recruitment campaigns, for volunteer recruitment campaigns or things like that, we will and we have held focus groups directly with parents to actually sense check and go, okay, so we did this campaign, this is how we thought it would communicate, and we thought it would come across as fun and would communicate these things. What do you think? And actually, I mean, it was virtually, because we're still in this hybrid way, aren't we, to a point, and actually just asking those audiences, those people directly, what do you think? And you know, whether you like what you hear or not, it's how that message has landed with those people. And it was so valuable, you know, a few hours out of months of planning a campaign. It's no time at all, really. So I'd say that's useful for us for larger marketing campaigns, and also if you're spending a lot of money, you need to make sure you're doing it in the right way. In terms of talking to people on social media for more day-to-day content and making sure you are getting the balance right, like Rosh said, and having that steady drum and making sure it's okay, we've started to do more putting together more polls on Instagram and seeing how much people are engaging, our volunteers are engaging, and even just, I mean, it's nothing new, but even just asking people to write in the comments on Facebook and things like that, to sense check how's it going. And I mean, you can tell quite quickly really with social media, because things spread like wildfire, don't they? But it's a really good way, I've found, we are doing more and more proactive interactive engagement with people, which is really good. And we have our more serious things, you know, we've got our policies in place, and we are responsible in the sense of, you know, we're there to support the girls and make sure we have a responsibility for the welfare of the girls as well, to make sure they're looked after. And we are reviewing, the other day we're in our tone of voice workshop, we're reviewing even the wording around that, because it's a very serious subject and you have to be factual, but actually, does that make sense to people that are reading it? And I can see in the comments some people are mentioning that you know, there is this dilemma by what you want to say versus your company policy of what you can say. That's tricky. All I'd say is, you know, where you can, even if it's in internal conversations, to try and figure out problems to briefs or the way you're talking to each other. If you can do that, try it where you can, even for your own understanding.
It's such a tricky balance, that, isn't it? I think it's just, I think that's probably where like a lot of the skill comes in, is being able to, you know, learn how to navigate that tightrope between policy and guidelines and what you really need to be saying from a human level to your audience.
Just add to that, sorry, just
go for it.
Touching on what like Lisa said, and somebody made a comment about like, what if there's, you know, the person that's running your social has that skill set, the person who's probably like head of a department or a decision maker might not always really understand like what is okay to say on social and what's not. Like the social media manager or the content creator like is the expert in that area, but sometimes it can be a little bit tricky getting buy-in from somebody else. So I think having something like a risk framework might be really helpful. If you're extra careful, like even if you're extra careful, there's always going to be like mistakes sometimes. People will go over it, and that's when you learn the most. But having steps in place to like avoid going viral for the wrong reasons, that's essentially like what people in other departments or higher up or legal might be worried about. Especially like as a bank, we're regulated. Our overall marketing risk appetite is lower than the average brand. Like Innocent can get away with chatting shit online, but we definitely can't. Like we have to still be relevant and careful. So our social media manager, Rich, he made a really handy risk framework whenever we're unsure whether to post something, especially, and this is especially relevant for reactive stuff, because in the moment when you want to be really quick and snappy, it can be quite hard to be like, yes, do we post it or not, without getting buy-in. So this framework is really helpful because, like, to give you, here's what an obstacle would look like for Monzo. Like trending news, there's a massive party at Downing Street when there shouldn't have been, and everyone's talking about it over on Twitter. Ryanair have basically ripped Boris Johnson a new one. So do we join in this conversation? Like it's tempting to, because it might seem harmless to get involved, but just to make sure, we'll check our risk framework. So one, could it cause reputational risk if poorly timed or in bad taste? Maybe. Could it go viral for the wrong reasons? Maybe. Could we cause upset or offense? Potentially yes to all the above. So immediately we know this is something that, even though we can laugh along with from the sidelines, we wouldn't necessarily get involved. And sometimes there's still a blurred line. So definitely like double, triple check with like somebody higher up. But having like this sort of guideline in place is really helpful if you haven't already. And it stops you from being like, we have sense checked it. No, we've sense checked it and we've checked it against this approved framework by somebody.
Yeah, that's such great advice. That's such great advice. And like, thank you to everyone. Like, there's some really nice comments coming through, and there's some good questions coming in. There was a comment about how kind of the business wants to use a certain type of language, but the audience might not need technical terms. Like, have you guys ever been in a situation where you've had to navigate that, or convince someone potentially further up that, like you said, doesn't necessarily get it? Like, any advice on that?
Yeah, I'm sure Rush does as well. My experience is really, it happens, probably happens to everyone on this call at some stage in their career, or it will do. And it's really tricky. It feels uncomfortable because they're senior to you. But ultimately, as Rosh said, you're specialist in your field. You know the language people understand, and their specialism is slightly different. That's why you're in the role you're in. One thing I'd say is, if there is tone of voice training going on at your organization or wherever you work, feedback to make sure it's happening at all levels of the organization at the right time. So it goes down from top down, rather than, do you see what I mean, from the most senior people, and then it flows down.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have the buy-in from the most senior people, you can push back, and I would always recommend to do that. But it's harder than if you're all on the same page from the beginning. If you're not at the moment, that's okay. It's not uncommon. I would recommend tone of voice training across all different levels for your organization, so everyone has the same understanding. And if you can't do that for various reasons, again, because that's quite a big conversation to have, I would suggest having a call with them and explaining why you're pushing back in this way, and let them know the knock-on impact that will have. So for example, if you wanted to communicate about a policy that's a positive change, I don't know, for example, we've changed our risk assessment forms to make them easier to use, so there's less burden on volunteers, so they don't have to spend more time, so they can free up time to be with their families. But actually, if it's communicated in a really scary corporate way, people will be overwhelmed. They'll probably think it's a bad thing, and the actual knock-on effect will be negative. So I think the more times you have the conversations, the easier they get, and you won't win all of them all the time. But I think it's explaining the knock-on impact it could have.
Yeah, definitely. There was a really good comment in about kind of using analytics data as well, and I think that plays really nicely into like the performance marketing or paid side, because you can be like, well, you could use this language and get that result, or we've tested this language and you'll get an even better one, and that can really help too. So there's just so many elements to it, isn't there? Again, depending on exactly what you're doing, what and where you work, and what kind of the environment is. Some other questions that we've had in. it might be to me, I'm not sure, but are you the infamous holder of the Monzo plushie? No.
It's not in here at the
Who
moment.
is?
Maybe. I can't reveal any more information, sorry.
We'll just see him appear from the side of the screen.
So, really good one here. So, what advice do you give to someone very new and junior to the field who's looking to progress, especially into a brand or industry that interests them? Like, brilliant question. Who wants to kick that one off?
I'm happy to. So just keep consuming, not just food, because food is great, but social media is social.
Yep.
You know, people share it, people talk about it. Just keep consuming it. I think there's no like nowadays there is, but back in my day, I literally sound 1,000 years old, but back in my day,
it was a long year last year.
Yes, it was. Yeah. You could just get into social by being into social. Like following the right brands, like reading the right things, like just practicing on your own as well. You know, even if it's just a little like tester account that you play around with for content, don't be afraid to actually use it. Two examples. When I started at Innocent, I actually started in a completely different role. I was basically like a project coordinator for something completely different. I was really interested in their social media side, and I asked to just get involved with writing some content, like writing a bit of like their newsletter or writing a tweet now and again, or responding to customers on social media. So it's like some community management.
Yep.
Literally start, like take whatever you can get and start wherever you can, because that's the best place to learn.
Yep.
And like these things fall into place the more you like put yourself out there. And also just practicing on your own. So don't just use a brand as like your only in, like you make it yourself. Like half the content creators out there now, because they're not just influencers anymore, like content creators are a whole different like world of like an online presence that's like a completely different vibe to influencers. So they made it themselves. Like literally get on TikTok, like don't be afraid to be silly and like piss around, because that's when also when you fail is like the best time for learning. It keeps you going as well. Like your failures like are actually what are going to teach you like what to do next. As another example, at Innocent, when we had like typos on our packaging, people would message that into us. They'd send a picture, they'd tweet us, they'd be like, I think something's wrong with the way that you spell orange or whatever. And that wasn't the end of it. That wasn't a failure. That was us like using that to our advantage. So we'd engage with them and be like, we never make mistakes and spell the word mistake wrong. Or we'll be like, we're only human, and like start this conversation. So like little like F-ups can also help you like learn so much.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not to be scared of, is it? And I think my advice would be like, don't be afraid to get in touch and ask for help or talk to people, because it's never been easier to find people within the industry that you're trying to get into and drop them a note. And if you don't ask, you don't get. And most people are more than willing to help out, I think. What's your advice, Lisa? It's just such a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and completely agree with what Rosh says in terms of don't be scared and have fun with it if you do mess up. And social media can be a wonderful, magical place. It's also a very volatile place, but I think it just shows that like there's a lot of passion out there for various topics. So don't see it as a bad thing. And I've got an example whereby my background is marketing for over 10 years and but the social media side, more of the emphasis on that has only really been in the past couple of years. And during lockdown, I had a lot of time to reflect, as we all did, a lot of time. And I started thinking about, okay, well, what do I like doing? And like, what interests me and what's going to make me happy? What would I like to learn? And I knew I wanted to grow my skills in social media, but I didn't know how. And the strangest thing happened. Like I was actually phoning up, I think it was the refugee charity, to try and give away some clothes. And I ended up talking to her on the phone about life It's a bit strange looking back, and charity sectors and how it was all going and stuff. And she mentioned to me that actually there was a real need for the charity sector to have digital marketers in there at the moment because of this pandemic we were in. And, you know, it was like we need to speak to people digitally, but a lot of charities don't necessarily know the best way to do it. So I spoke to her, and then I ended up Googling quite a lot, found a charity called the Wolfpack Project. They're a startup charity. You can please go and check them out afterwards. They're fantastic. They help reduce loneliness. And at the time when the pandemic was happening, I was like, oh, I can do something that helps. And that aligned with my values and what I wanted to do and would make me happy. So I ended up volunteering and doing their social media for a little while. And then, as Rosh said, like things naturally progress. And then when you start applying for roles and things like that, they go, oh, you've done that. That's impressive. And it's authentic. Like it's something you're genuinely interested in that you've been doing. So I'd say take every opportunity you can. Don't say no unless it's completely outrageous, and talk to people, because a lot of people, if they don't necessarily have the experience, they'll probably know someone that you can talk to as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like really, really good advice there. So thank you.
There's also one last
yeah,
really thing.
go for it.
I think that was amazing what you said, Lisa. And just to like back that up as well, I think if you're ever unsure about like what to talk about, like what is my niche, like I'd say embrace your weird, because like literally anything can be your niche. So like if one of your ears is bigger than the other, that's your niche.
Yeah.
If like you're obsessed with trains, that's your niche. There's a guy on TikTok called Francis who, or I don't know where he started, TikTok or Instagram, but he's absolutely obsessed with trains. If you haven't heard of him, go and check him out. And literally just him filming himself reacting to when a train goes past. He's now got deals with Gucci.
Yeah,
it's like
incredible.
And like North Face or whoever, but like that's just him being himself, being just completely natural. So not trying to like tailor himself into what he thinks Instagram wants to see. Instagram used to be a place that was like quite shiny, quite pretty, very aspirational content. He said, no, I'm going to talk about trains because that's what I want to do. And now he's like changing the nature of like what a content creator is. So, and that's just him being himself. So embrace like how weird you are. And if you've got like any quirks or whatever, use that to your advantage.
Yeah, it's amazing. Actually, on the subject of TikTok and kind of looking kind of towards this year, obviously it's a big one. What platforms are you guys focusing on for this year ahead? Like, are you mixing things up a bit? Are you planning to experiment on anything new? Are you sticking with what you know? What's your take on all of that?
For us at Girl Guiding, we're reviewing our social strategy, to be honest, and looking at the landscape of social media has changed a lot, and I think the way the world looks now. So we are reviewing and looking at, we're going to be using Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But for example, we have 2 Facebook and 2 Twitter accounts. We have one that talks to our parents, we call them our external account profile, and our member profile that talks to volunteers. So there's a lot of channels going on. So we're looking at which types of content are now going to be best for those channels. TikTok we're not on there at the moment. I don't think, to be honest, we will have plans to yet. It's something that we will need to do at some point, but it requires a lot of strategy work behind it. If it was my own personal account, fine, but it's more of a strategic brand account, so it's slightly different. So I think for us, we're reviewing the types of content and the way we use that across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also LinkedIn is an interesting one, because we were very much using that before just for recruitment purposes, and now we're starting to broaden out the types of content on there as well.
Interesting. And how about you, Rosh? And also to that point you made right at the beginning, I think, about almost like picking your battles and, you know, playing to your strengths and not trying to do too much at once. And how does that balance against making sure you're moving forwards? Because the 2 things conflict sometimes, don't they? But they're both really important. So how do you see it?
Sorry, I always do this. Can you define the question again?
Yeah, no worries. So I guess like what platforms are you focusing on
Okay.
for the year? What's your take in terms of new experimentation? But also then how does that balance against the point you made earlier in terms of just not spreading yourself too thin, and there's only a certain amount of hours in the day and do what you do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, cool. So I guess it all comes down to a content strategy. And that's something that the team is working on at the moment. So we want to really revamp the strategy so that we're really clear on what direction we want to go in. Similar to like what Lisa was saying, like I think we do too much sometimes. I think we're trying to talk about loads of different things, stay relevant, stay reactive, try new platforms. And, you know, you can end up not doing everything well rather than
Yep.
just doing one thing and smashing it at that one thing.
Yep.
So I'm part of that conversation, but like not an overall decider. So I'm excited to see what people are going to tell me to do because I love that. That's how I operate best. Someone being like, do this, I'm like, cool, I'm on it. But off the back of that, that can kind of like lead us to the directions that we want to be in.
Yep.
And one of that, whatever the decision is definitely going to be TikTok.
Yep.
So we are still relatively new to TikTok. We joined sort of like towards the tail end of last year. And we really were a bit like, what are we doing on TikTok? Like we're a bank. Like nobody wants to see a bank on TikTok. How can we be funny as a bank on TikTok? Like how can we like match the tone of the channel and still be taken seriously as a regulated bank? So there was a lot of trial and error, and that was actually like if we're talking about failures, like that was one thing that we were quite afraid to try, but we just jumped in and we were constantly like, what's our strategy? What's our plan? But I think just diving in and doing it, like literally putting that off again and again doesn't help. I think just jumping in straight away and being like, okay, we might mess up the first 10, but we can delete them. They're not going to be there for, well, everything's on the internet forever, but let's try it. As long as we're not offending anyone or upsetting anyone or breaking any rules, like we're trying, like we're doing our best, Tom, and that's all that matters. So TikTok is a really big one. It's it's something that we're trying organically at the moment. Again, we're channeling our laugh and learn content on there.
Yep.
And I think influencers, more in the sense of content creators, is something that we really want to explore this year.
Yep.
Video is king, I think, like on Instagram, on TikTok, like I think for us, Twitter is like a steady drumbeat of like content that we already understand. So like using video to talk about money is completely new to us. And we've just started exploring that. So I'm really excited to try that out. And also, I think live content. So we've never done this before. We actually did our first one today, on TikTok. So
oh wow.
My social media manager, thanks, yay. Our social media manager, Rich, I work remotely, but he's in the office today, and we were like, what do we do live on TikTok? Because it's such a weird thing to do. So we have like a bunch of dummy cards in the office like this, and he basically just spent like 10 minutes making a house of cards using and this is the first time we did it. He just put up like a little whiteboard and it said, we're trying to make a house of cards, here's how many times we've tried and failed, and had the little plushie in the background as well, because everyone on TikTok loves plushie. Yeah, and it went well. Like it was just like he just decided, I'm in the office today, I'm going to do it. And it did all right. So now we're like, okay, what's next for us? If we can do that, then we can do it bigger. If we can do it bigger, then we can do a panel. If we can do a panel, we can get like people at Monzo to talk about money and do a Q&A. So like work your way up, like baby steps to things like that. So yeah, video, I guess, is my answer for what we're doing this year.
Excellent. There was a comment on like whether or not it's wrong to major on LinkedIn. And I think probably depends a lot on business and the audience, but I would definitely not discount it. Like, are there any platforms, I guess, on that point that you would move away from? Are there any things that you've tried recently that have failed and you definitely wouldn't do again? Because I think it's easy to look at all the new exciting stuff, but like, have there been any tough lessons in terms of what you don't want to repeat, or obviously within the realms of what you can share on a webinar that's,
I can't think of an exact example at the moment, but the one thing I would say is think about your right. One thing we've been reviewing more and more at Girl Guiding is your right to play in that, as in that topic you're talking about.
Yeah.
So when I say that, I mean, okay, so anyone can talk about any conversation they want to, but it's like, what are you saying? What is your message as a brand? As in, like, what are you actively doing in that area to help with that or support with it? So, for example, if you want to, one of our commitments is to be diverse, inclusive, and accessible to all girls and young women. So actually, it's very important to make sure you are saying what you're actively doing in that field, in that space, to help with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't say it's only really a failure, I think, if you're not being clear in the way you're communicating. So one thing we have noticed, actually, an example's just come to me, is awareness days. So you know how you have different religious awareness days and general, there's like World Hug Day or something like that as well. There's lots of lovely days out there and more controversial ones. But the problem is, when you just mark a day as a charity organisation like us, it doesn't always land well with people, because what are you actually saying as an organisation? How are you helping people? What are you doing in that space? What resources and support are you offering people? You're not. You're marking a day. And it's that whole thing that we're going back to about, like, sending out too many messages across too many channels because you need to put out daily content. You don't. And I think it's really important to remember the why you're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. It's bubble wrap day. But you're right. Like, it's so easy to try and do. Just back to that thing, like, so easy to try and do everything, and like going back to that. Okay, well, why are we doing it, and like, what's actually the most effective, best thing for us is always a good question to ask, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've got a little bit of time left. If anyone's got any more questions, let us know. There's been some really good ones. There's some really nice comments coming through as well. So if there's anything you want to know about social or digital marketing in general for this year, or just anything, let us know and we'll do our best to give you a good answer. One question that did come through a little bit earlier was, again on like career progression, which is interesting. So can digital marketing roles lead to content creation roles? Or would you recommend going, if you want to do content, get straight into it? Or like, obviously there's loads of different routes through, but I guess, Rosh, in terms of your career progression, what's your take on that?
So I've just seen someone's going, "I'm Monzo hiring." So you can be a recruiter as well for Monzo.
Well, if I get fired after this for saying something I shouldn't have, you can have my job. But,
there you go, Elliot. That's for you.
I think you've been fine.
We are hiring. We're not hiring in the content team, but please just keep checking the website. We've got a careers page. Monzo, I'm not plugging Monzo here, but they are really great employees. So I would recommend. Can digital marketing roles lead to content creation roles? I think anything can lead to anything these days. Like, you know, don't put yourself in a box. Like, just like, you're already in the right area. Like, there's people who are, I don't know, plumbers who are like, can I become a content creator? Like, literally, yes, you can. Like, anybody can be a content creator if that's what you want. Like, content creation is what you do, showing what you do online, to me, or like doing what you do best but online, and like giving people a piece of your personality along with it. So yeah, absolutely. And like we talked a little bit about how to just like jump in and bite the bullet and get into that earlier. But I'd say like you are definitely in the right industry already if you're in a digital marketing role. And again, like, just to reiterate, like, don't rely on the business that you're in to elevate you further in what you want to do. So don't just wait for a content creation role to show up, like to that position to be available in your company. Like, go see if you can freelance somewhere, like volunteer for a day, or like Lisa said, she also volunteered at like a charity called Wolfpack, and that's kind of like how you got into this like marketing role. So there's like options out there. Just like pick what you love, and like, you do you and the world will watch you for it. And that's like a Michelle Obama quote.
I love that. Oh, okay.
Awesome.
Totally could have stamp marked that.
You do you and the world will watch. Like, just get into it.
Love that.
You
Absolutely
do you.
love that. Absolutely love that. Cool. So I guess, and obviously, like, jump in with any last questions, comments, everything like that. But I guess what would your one big piece of advice be for people finalising their plans, or kind of just looking at their plans for this year in the world of social or digital marketing? What's your big thing?
Oh, that's a big old question, isn't
It's
it?
a big.
What's your one thing? Be clear and keep it simple. That's two things.
We can bundle that together into one. That was great.
Okay.
So little time. I think for like, if you're part of a brand, like if you're here on behalf of a brand, and you're trying to figure out like what you're doing on social this year, I think don't like rely on somebody else's strategy. So like definitely take inspiration from other brands, but that's not who your brand is. So focus on what you do best, and like define your tone of voice, define the way you're going to communicate. If your brand was a person, what would this person be like? And that will sort of help you lead like the way that you communicate. And that's what people are ultimately interested in. They don't come to social to buy your product, they come to social to fall in love with the brand. So brand is key over ROI, I would say.
Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, and just to build on that, sorry, I was being a bit silly before. I always get excited in these live situations that are new to me, apparently. I would just say, remember your why. Why are you doing it? And if you keep going back to the why, I know it sounds simple and obvious, but it's so true. If you're not clear and if you're not sure why you're doing it, your thought process will be muddled and the message won't be clear.
Yeah, definitely. And like, it's just a good exercise, isn't it, to do that? So 100% agree. We've got two last questions. So should we do some rapid fire responses? So how much of your social content is social only versus linking in with blog posts, white papers, PR news, etc.? They're saying they often find themselves relying on what other people are doing to inform their content, which makes it really hard to be on top of things. So how do you balance that?
Oh, good question.
That's a tricky one. In terms of, I don't know how much I can answer this, but in terms of how much of our content, so we have, when we keep talking about this drumbeat, we'll have regular emails. I think we've got an email that goes out once every 2 weeks, and an email to parents that goes out once a month. And then we have daily content that goes out on social media. And that is a mix, if I'm honest, of linking to blogs versus user-generated content versus just talking about things that are happening in our strategy and with our marketing campaigns. Yep. I think the point around relying on what other people are doing is it can be frustrating because it can impact your own plans for social. The one thing I'd say is that we're trying to do more of is you've got all this lovely content and resources that almost should bolster onto what you're doing. It's to help support it. If you have your social media plan of the things that you want to say, so if you have a clear message for the month you want to say and you have your social media plan that revolves around that, everything else should align to it or just help inform that, if you see what I mean.
Yep. That makes absolute sense. And I think my observation from looking at both of your social channels is that a lot of it is social first, or it's like a social first take on other bits of news around the company and finding ways to still get it on there that's relevant and fits with the platform. Last question, I think. So how do you guys split blah 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 blah? How do you split branding activity versus direct response? And how do you convince stakeholders to take a longer term view on investing in longer term strategies? That's a big one to end with, isn't it?
Sorry, dumb question. What does direct response mean?
So kind of, I guess it's, how do you split the focus on building brand, building awareness, building engagement, building your audience versus going for like a direct return on ad spend and kind of faster sales in the short term? because it's hard when you've got, I guess, a channel like Facebook ads, or it's probably more applicable to the advertising, but when you can get direct sales, but then that limits your ability to get a wider awareness and build a brand. Do you guys, does that cross with your work, or do you, is your main focus on that brand activity? How does that fit into your day to day?
Well, at Monzo we have a paid social team. So that's not my area at all. So I don't want to butcher what that team does. But they basically are in charge of putting our name in front of more people on social who are more likely to convert. And then I'd also say that promoting your brand and building brand love through organic social is a business goal, and it is more of a long term, but the business needs to understand the value of that. So social, to me, social is about brand love, brand engagement. You tell people that you're different to other brands through your product marketing, but you also have to show it through your tone of voice and your creativity. Humor's a great differentiator for that as well. But the business has to get that from the top down, so that can be a little bit of a barrier. But I think having a paid team also helps if you're like lucky enough to have one.
Yep. Perfect. Well, look, I think we're there or thereabouts. Yes to that question. That is Ponderings of a PPC by Kirk Williams on the shelf above the tangle of headsets and the small cacti.
Super great attention to detail on this call. We've got some Hawkeyes out there today, haven't we?
We have. Like, Lisa Ross, thank you so much. That was genuinely like a brilliant conversation with so many bits of great advice and really good fun to do. And thank you so much to everyone for joining, for kind of all your comments and questions. Really good fun. We'll be back in a month or so with another one. And any more feedback, let us know, and see you soon.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for your questions.
Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and have a great afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.